Hello, advanced social psychology students. Welcome to Unit 1, Module 6, Chapter 8, Helping and Altruism. All right, let me share the screen. And there's only 3 PowerPoint slides for this chapter. It's one of the shorter chapters, less information than in many of the other chapters, although I think it's very interesting information. I think this video will be about 45 minutes, so it's a little bit shorter than some of the other videos that lecture videos we've done. Okay, so let's start. What do we even mean by altruism? So the definition that your book gives for altruism is any behavior that is designed to increase another person's welfare, particularly those actions that do not seem to provide a direct reward to the person who performs them. And I am telling you, the research, the papers that were written, I mean, it could fill a huge room from floor to ceiling of all of these papers written trying to decide if altruism even exists. Because oftentimes when we're helping someone, are we helping them so that in the future they'll help us? Are we helping them to keep, those genes in the gene pool? Are we helping them so that we'll feel good about ourselves? Because when we help people, we sort of get a squirt of dopamine and it makes us feel good. Are we helping people so that we'll have a self concept that we're a great person? Are we helping people so people around us will think that we're great? I mean, and so in all those cases, you're not being altruistic. You're helping someone in order to get a benefit for yourself. So does altruism even exist? And again, papers just piled high, high, high. And most of them would say, no, altruism doesn't exist. But then at some point they go, well, let's assume it exists. Why would it exist? What would be the evolutionary advantage? And it would be advantageous to the group as a whole, especially if we were willing to self-sacrifice in order to make many members of the group survive, or to make things better for a lot of people and only one person is having to sacrifice something. Then from an evolutionary perspective, there'd be an advantage to the group. And for a lot of time, people were talking about reciprocal altruism. So I'm helping you, but then why am I doing this? Well, the advantage would be that you would help me sometime in the future. But if that's really why you're helping, then that's not altruism, because that's like you're almost putting good tasks that are owed to you in the bank of the future, and that you can call on at another time. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So I'm scratching yours now with the assumption that in the future, when I need it, you're going to scratch mine. Well, that's not altruism then. That's me doing something now for a benefit in the future. And so it's not. It does provide a direct reward, just a future reward rather than a present reward. So finally, thank goodness, after a decade of people just trying to understand, does altruism even exist? Is it real? People decided, who cares? I can remember reading these thinking, I don't care. I just want to study just want to study when people do help, how do they do it? And so it became renamed, and now we call it pro-social behavior. So this is behavior that helps another person, or groups of people, but you could be doing it so that you get something. We're going to allow that to exist and study it anyway. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about factors that end up affecting pro-social behavior. And, this is to me really important. I want to create a society where these factors are salient and prominent so that I'll encourage pro-social behavior. And so if you, run an office in some way, you want to set up the situation to make it as likely as possible that people will help one another, that the coworkers will help one another. How do you do this? Well, you want to know these factors that affect pro-social behavior. So here we go. The first one is no surprise to anyone. Modeling, if you model anything, it tends to increase. If we watch another person help, we are more likely to help. So modeling plays a huge role. I find it cute, an adorable study. It's super old. It was done back before people had cell phones in their cars. And what they did is they found a spot on the highway where there was like a turnoff corner if a car was in trouble. And then up ahead a mile or two, there's another turnoff where you could go if a car was in trouble. And there's no exits in between those two things. And what they did is they put a car, they had on the second little area that you go if your car's in trouble. They had a car that was obviously in trouble. The hood was up. There was a person standing there like, what do I do? Okay. But 2 miles or 1 mile prior to that, in that other little area where you go if you're running into trouble, for half the time, there's nothing there. But for the other half of the time, they have two cars there. One that looks like it's in trouble with the front hood up and someone standing there, but then another car that's behind it, and there's two people there, and it looks as though one person is helping the other. So it gives you this feeling or this story that would be consistent with what you're looking at as you're driving by, is that that car needed help and that this other car stopped behind them and got out and is helping the first car. Does that kind of make sense? And about a mile later, you see a car in need. What do you do? And what they found was that when you had that modeling of helping behavior, way more people stopped to help the couple miles later when you had the car in need than when there was nothing in that first part and you just came upon the car in need. So that's some evidence for modeling. There are better studies, but that one always stuck in my head. It's kind of cute. So if we watch someone help, we're more likely to help. Sometimes I wonder if it wouldn't be beneficial on the news if there was an area or a 5-minute segment every night on the news, great things going on in our community. And they highlighted someone in the community that was helping people. And each night they'd highlight someone who's doing well. We'd all see that modeled, and then we'd be more likely to help. So, okay, the next one is time. And this is huge. And I'm sort of giving you the answer, the finding before I give you the whole story. But if you've had a course in social psychology, especially a graduate level course, everyone is going to expect you to know the Good Samaritan study. Okay, very classic study. And it's not only considered a classic within the area of social psychology, it's considered a classic in the area of in all of psychology. So given that you're going to have a Master's of Science in Behavioral Sciences on the general psychology track, anyone who knows that you have that degree is going to expect that you know about this study, the Good Samaritan study. So this was done at Yale University, and it was done with seminary students. No, it wasn't Yale, it was Princeton. Sorry, Princeton. And so they're seminary students. These are students who are in the theological institute or whatever, and they're training to be pastors at churches, right? So these are, we would think, people who would be more likely to help in general, right? They're dedicating their whole life to this. And what happened is they're meeting with them and they tell them, we need you to go over to the radio station. And you are on the radio station, you're going to give a 5-minute, or maybe it was a 10-minute talk, a lecture, okay? And half the people were told, you're kind of running late. You're going to have just enough time to get there. So here's a map, hurry, hurry. And the other half of the people were told, you've got plenty of time to get over there. It doesn't really happen for about a half hour, but you might as well start making your way over there. Here's the map. You better get going. Not better get going, but you might as well start heading that way. So that was the main independent variable was time. Either they felt like they had lots of time or they felt like time was really limited. They were late, okay? The other independent variable was the topic of the lecture that they were going to talk about on the radio. Half of the people were told, we'd like you to give a talk about vocational opportunities for those in the seminary program, blah, blah, blah. So what kind of jobs are available to you? The other topic, they were supposed to give a lecture about the Good Samaritan parable. Now, I know we're in the Bible Belt and you guys all know this, but just in case you don't, the Good Samaritan parable is a parable in which Jesus basically takes the people that are hated at the time, the Samaritans. They were like the people that were from the place that you didn't want to be from. I always liken it to it's our pedophiles of today, our child molesters of today. Those are the people that we hate. And Jesus tells a story about a man who's beaten, robbed, and left for dead. And a Samaritan comes by and cares for the person, takes them to gets them cared, clothed, takes them to an inn, gets a doctor to see them, pays for their time that they're at in the inn while they rest and get well. And basically, Jesus is saying that this was a good Samaritan, that we're supposed to help one another, that this is what Jesus requires. Okay, so that's the talk that half of the people are going to be giving. Okay, so then they're sent on their way. So you've got two independent variables. So you've got people who are late and are going to talk about the Good Samaritan parable, people that have plenty of time and are going to talk about the Good Samaritan parable, people that are late that are going to talk about vocational opportunities for those in the seminary, and people who have plenty of time and they're going to get to the radio station to give a lecture on vocational opportunities for people in the seminary. Make sense? Okay. As they follow the map and make their way over to the radio station, they set it up, the experimenters did, where you're going to go down this like narrow little pathway in between two buildings. It's not really an alley, but like a small area between two buildings. And they made it where there's a man bent over, groaning, clearly needing help, all alone in the middle of this area between the two buildings. And the area was so narrow, and the man was situated himself in such a way that in order for you to get past him, you all but had to step over him, almost push him out of the way. And of course, he's a Confederate in on the experiment with the experimenters. And the dependent variable was, did you stop to help? And they even counted it where you didn't actually have to even be the one to stop and help. You could walk over the man, keep walking, and then see some students right up ahead and say, there's a man back there who really needs help. I'm late and I have to go, but can you make sure he gets some help? That would count as you help the person. Okay. So the dependent variable was either you helped or you got someone else to help. And the other thing is you didn't help at all. Okay. And of course, what the authors who were doing this, Latine and Dutton and Latine, they expected that the people who were thinking about the Good Samaritan parable as they're making their way to the radio station were the ones who were going to stop and help. As we learned in last week's in the chapter on attitudes that easily come to mind, attitudes that we're thinking about, attitudes that are accessible are better predictors of behavior. So obviously, and you don't even need to read a research article to know that. I mean, sort of common sense, although it's not always common, as we talked about, it's not always correct, as we talked about. But it almost makes sense that if I'm thinking about, wow, it's really important to help people, it's really important to help people, you're going to be more likely to help someone than if you're talking about vocational opportunities for the seminary student, right? Turns out that didn't make a difference at all. All that mattered was time. Those that were told they had plenty of time to get there stopped to help. And those that were told they were late didn't. And so all of us who have read the study, even you who've heard about it, like I have this image in my head of this, future pastor at a church walking down an alley thinking about how important it is to help people as he steps over the person in need and goes on his way. It's so important to help people. It's so important to help people. Kind of gives you one of those sick chuckles, like kind of hurts your stomach a little bit, but you're like, whoa. So people who believe they have time are much more likely to help than people that don't. And I don't know about you, but when I was working at Cameron, all the students I met, they were all stressed, stretched to their absolute limits. They had kids, jobs, families, parents they were helping, friends they were trying to, and time. They did not have time. Now that I'm retired, I'm meeting a lot of people who have more time, and it's interesting how many of them are engaged in real helping behaviors. And it makes sense. They have time. The research shows if you have time, you're more likely to help. Another variable that plays a role in helping is the reinforcement and reward. So when when the reward for helping is high and the cost of helping is low, or either one of those alone, we're more likely to help. Does that kind of make sense? So if someone needs help, they need me to open the door for them. And it's really easy for me to open the door. It's going to cost me very little, and the reward is going to be high. I'm going to go, oh, look at me. Look at what a good helper I am. So I'm going to help them open the door. But if a person walks into the office I'm sitting in right now and says, I really need your help, I'm like, okay, what can I do? And they're like, I need $5,000. Well, that cost is way too high for me. So I'm not going to do it. Do you know what I mean? I'm probably going to say no. Now, if the reward was super high for the $5,000, then there might be a way where I would give someone $5,000 if that was going to enable, I don't know, 5 students to graduate from Cameron or something. If the reward was really high and I had an extra $5,000, even if the cost is high, I might be able to do it as long as the reward is higher. But you kind of get the sense of what we're talking about here. Okay, then there's a bunch of research on mood and how mood influences helping behavior. And this cracks me up because it almost feels like any mood you're in, you'll end up being more like to. It's not really true, but it kind of feels that way after a time. When we're in a good mood, a positive mood, we are more likely to help. And it doesn't have to be like you just found out you won the new Nobel Prize. It can be really small things like you're walking along the street and you find a dime and you pick it up. It gives you a little boost, a little good mood. You're more likely to help. I mean, hard to believe. So even little boosts of good mood will increase helping. Another thing that increases helping is guilt. If we feel guilty, we're more likely to help. Now, although that's negative, I don't know, if you work at a church and you want to get some people to sign up for something, you might guilt someone into it, say some things that would make someone feel guilty for having so much time and doing so little. Maybe they'll be more likely to sign up to help you. Also, distress. When you're distressed because you're listening to someone else suffer, or you're aware of someone else's suffering, you're more likely to help. So if like the TV commercials where they're showing little kids who are starving with distended stomachs, when you watch that, you're gonna have some distress from watching other people suffer, and that's gonna make it more likely for you to send money in to help and do what you can. Does that kind of make sense? And that's why they tend to show the pictures of the kids in need rather than give you statistics. If someone just reads a list of this is how many kids need help and this is what's going to happen if we don't get money and take more of a logical approach, because it's the distress that you feel when you're aware of someone else's suffering, and we're much more likely to get in that distress state if we're watching it rather than just hearing some statistics about it. Okay. Also, there's a personality characteristic that we call it the pro-social personality. And people who score high in pro-social personality are more likely to help. And they're always like this through their life. Remember the personality characteristics, you tend to be like this through your whole life. I think we all know, like you could go into a kindergarten room and there are some kids where when water is spilled, there's some kids that just naturally go for the paper towels and start helping everyone, helping people clean up the spilled water. And other kids that barely even notice that happened. And even if they do notice it, it doesn't occur to them to go help. So there is this personality characteristic, we call it the pro-social personality. And your textbook in chapter 8 has a link in it, and the link will take you to the personality test so you can take it and then find out where you are on this pro-social personality test. I think it might be interesting to take it. It's not like, some of the other, it's not it's not like we've got one pro-social personality test that everyone knows about, and if you've had this class, they're going to expect you know about it. There's probably 5 or 10 of these, and the textbook gives you a good one, but it's fine with me if you decide you're not interested and you don't take it. It's there if you want to. Don't feel like you have to. Okay. Then a lot of what determines whether or not a person's going to help has to do with the person who's in need of the help. So no matter what my pro-social personality is, whether it's low or high, my mood is, how much time I have, whether I just saw someone else help, even though all those do play a role, another thing that's going to play a role is characteristics of the person who needs my help. And that's going to influence whether or not I'm going to help too. And so here are some characteristics. There's a whole bunch of them, but here are the 4 that your textbook keys in on, and that or that are really well known. So even if your textbook doesn't talk about them, I wanted you to know them. So the first is we are more likely to help people that we like. So if you are well liked, then you're going to be more likely to get help. And way back, way in the future, it's like it's the second to last week before the final exam. We're going to do a whole chapter on liking and loving, and we're going to go through the characteristics of people that we like. So you'll even get to know more of that when we get to that chapter. But people that we like, we're more likely to help. We're also more likely to help people that have helped us in the past. That reciprocity we talked about, reciprocating, really does play a role. If someone helped me when I was down and out, and now they're down and out, I'm going to be more likely to help them. We're also more likely to help people that we do not think are responsible for the situation that they're in. We see them as a victim. We're more likely to help victims than people that we think they got themselves in that situation. And just to give you an example of this, where I think it'll become really obvious, this never happened. But let's say my brother calls me up and he says, Mary, I'm short on my mortgage. I decided to take Sue, his wife, out for an anniversary dinner, and we went to one of those Michelin star restaurants, and the meal cost $1,000, but it was the best meal I've ever had. But now I'm short on my mortgage, so could you loan me $1,000? I'm gonna be like, what? What were you smoking before you decided to spend $1,000 on a meal when you haven't paid off your mortgage? That's absurd. I'm probably not going to say, oh yeah, here you go. But imagine that versus my brother calls me up and says, Mary, could you loan me $1,000 for the mortgage? Right now, let's say he was doing construction. Right now, construction's really bad. It's hard for me to get a job. I mean, hard for me to get work. The last job that I did, he's not going to pay me for another 2 months. I'm really stuck, but I've been working as hard as I can and doing everything I can. Well, I'm going to see him as a victim. And if I have an extra $1,000 that I could spare, then I'm more likely to give it to him. Now, here's the trick. If you really are in a bad situation and you need help, the best thing for you to get the help is to present it to people as though you're a victim and you played no role in getting in the situation that you're in. But for you to not end up in the situation that you're in again in the future, the best thing that you can do is figure out what role you did play, even if it was a small one, so that you don't do that again and end up in the situation again. So it is kind of tricky when you are someone who's in need. You want to really come off as though you are a victim and you did nothing wrong, but at the same time, really make a good accounting of what you could have done differently so that you don't get in this situation again. It's kind of a little tricky. And the last characteristic is we are way more likely to help people that we have empathy for. So again, when I think of what was it, Lewis, I'm going blank on the name. He did a telethon, I think for Jerry Lewis would have a telethon for MS, muscular dystrophy. And I think it was muscular dystrophy, it might have been muscular sclerosis. But part of it is they'd show videos of what it's like to be the parents or what it's like to live in a family where one of the family members, one of the kids has muscular dystrophy. And you'd see like how hard it is for the mother to wake them up and how much the other child had to be really independent and make their own lunch, and take it away because the mother was, and you really got this sense of what it's like to live in this family and how much it affects everyone. You feel lots of empathy toward that family, and you are way more likely then to send money to help in research for MS or MD, whichever it was. Okay, so those are the factors that affect prosocial behavior. Now we are going to really switch, and we're going to start talking about not prosocial behavior like helping in general, but steps that have to happen for you to help in an emergency. So Latney and Darley came up with this theory. It has 5 different steps. And it says that in order for you to help in an emergency situation, you have to say yes to all 5 of these. And at any place in this decision chain, if you say no, then you're not going to help. And the reason why, like when you're looking at the 5 things here, notice the incident, interpret it as an emergency, assume responsibility, plan what to do, and then do it. You're like, well, duh, Mary, really? We needed to have researchers and people study this? This is like common sense. It's only common sense because they've come up with it. So at the beginning, before they had done any of this research, people were trying to understand helping behavior in emergency situations, and it was flippy. For example, there's this one finding, we call it the bystander effect, which is the more people that are around that are available to help, the less likely any one of them is to actually help. Kind of bizarre. And Latney and Darley started doing their research to try to understand this very story that was in, I think it was the New York Times, but then it hit like national media. This was before social media was out. And it was Kitty Genovese, I think is how you say her name. And she lived in New York City, a single woman, and supposedly she was stabbed to death on the steps in front of her apartment complex. And it took hours for this assailant to attack her over and over again. And she yelled and cried for help. And according to the news report that was written, they went and interviewed the people in the building, and many of them heard her cry for help, but only a few of them called the police, and most of them never called the police till much later. And Kitty died, according to the police report. Kitty died, and people wrote, like the person who wrote the article was like, people in New York have a cold, cold heart. Look at this woman got stabbed to death in the front of her own apartment complex, and like no one stopped to help. No one helped her. Well, Latney and Darley then went on and did lots of research to try to help, to try to understand when people will help in an emergency situation like this. But then decades later, they went back. I'm not sure which researcher went back to really try to find out more about the Kitty Genovese murder. And it turns out the reporter made the whole story up. I don't even know if there was a Kitty who got murdered, but it was exaggerated or it wasn't true. But like, it's awful that they made up a story and it took off, but had they not, these researchers wouldn't have done all this research and come up with this theory that really helps. So who knows? It's just the most bizarre thing. But Latney and Darley, they wanted to do research to try to understand why is it that the more people that are available to help, the less likely any one of them is to help, this bystander effect. And they wanted to understand what needs to happen in order for someone to help in an emergency. So what they thought, and it's very logical, I read the 5 steps to you, they're very logical. The first thing that has to happen is that you have to notice the incident. If you don't notice it, you're not going to help, obviously, right? So their idea, Latney and Darley's idea, is that in a crowded street, you might not notice the incident. Like one time when I was in New York City, the street was so crowded, it was like, 15 people deep. So if there was a person moaning and groaning who was like way over here, and there's all this crowd around me, I wouldn't even notice that person. I wouldn't be able to hear them or see them. And so the more people that are around, the more crowded it is. It could be the harder it is for everyone to notice the incident going on because it's so crowded. Your view of everyone is very limited, and it's only the people right around the person in need of help that are able to notice the incident. Okay. So if you don't notice the incident, you're not going to help. If you do notice the incident, you're going to go to step 2. Step 2 is you have to interpret the incident as an emergency. You have to look at the situation and go, this person needs help. And a lot of times it's ambiguous. A lot of times it's not clear if the person needs help. If they're bent over and shaking, are they cold? Are they in need of a jacket, or do they really need help, like they're having some kind of insulin reaction or a diabetic type thing going on? Nowadays, are they on fentanyl? And like, I mean, I don't know what's going on. If you are in a public situation where there's lots of people around and a man and a woman start fighting, like yelling insults at one another, is that an emergency? Is one of them going to hurt the other, or is this their form of weird play? This is just their relationship. It doesn't mean anything to them, or even in a really whacked out, this is their form of foreplay. I mean, who knows? How do I interpret the incident? And with ambiguous situations, one thing we do is we look at other people in the room. We look at other people in the street. We look at other people who are observing the situation. And in ambiguous situations, we are much more likely to conform with others. We're going to talk about that when we get to chapter 6 on influencing and conforming. So what happens is when everyone else is just walking by and not doing anything, then we're like, well, I guess it's not an emergency. Where if this was going on and you were the only one around, or there were only a couple people around, you're going to go, whoa, I got to make sure the person's okay. And you're going to go, do you need anything? Do you need help? I know this is hard for you to know this if you really do need help, but one of the best things you can do if you need help is to look someone in the eye. You in the blue shirt, call 911. Assign someone to it and tell them exactly what you want them to do. And you're much more likely to get help that way. You're making it where you're interpreting the incident as an emergency for them, the incident as an emergency for them. So the more crowded it is and the more people that are just walking by, the less likely anyone is to go, this must be an emergency. Everyone else around doesn't think it is, so I guess it's not. Okay, so you can see how the more crowded it is, the less likely you are to notice it. But even if you do notice it, if everyone else is walking by, the less likely you are to interpret it as an emergency. If you don't interpret it as an emergency, you're not going to help. If you do interpret it as an emergency, you go to step 3, and that is you're going to assume responsibility. But if there's a lot of people around, you're probably going to go, is there someone who's more qualified than I am to help? So if the person seems to need CPR, I took CPR way back when I was in high school and college, and I was a lifeguard, but I haven't had CPR since then, which is a long time ago. So am I going to assume responsibility? I'm going to wait to see if someone else in the crowd is a doctor or a nurse or an EMT, or is a current lifeguard and knows CPR rather than me stepping in. But if I'm walking down the street and someone seems to be in need and it's not crowded at all, there's only a couple people around, I may not know CPR well, but I'm all this person has. Do you know what I mean? So I'm more likely to assume responsibility. So again, the more people that are around, the less likely you might be to assume responsibility. And if you don't assume responsibility, you're not going to help. If you do assume responsibility, then you're going to go to step 4, which is you're going to come up with a plan of what you should do. What is the best thing you can do? And what we know is that the more people that are around us, and we're going to talk about this when we get to the working groups chapter, chapter 10, the more people that are around, the more aroused we are. And it's not just humans. Cockroaches are like this too. A cockroach with other cockroaches around is more aroused than a cockroach who's alone. So when there's people around us, we are more aroused. For complex tasks, arousal gets in our way. So when you go to plan what to do, if you're highly aroused, because obviously it's an emergency, plus there's a bunch of people around you, it's going to be hard for you to come up with a plan. Now, stuff that you know automatically, that's going to come really easy to you, even when you're aroused, which is why to train EMTs and firefighters and military people and police, we have them practice, 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 and do it over and over and over and over again. So it's almost automatic. So even it's not a complex task to them. It's an easy task for them, a simple task for them. So even when they're aroused, because it's an emergency, because there's people around, they'll be able to do it very easily. So again, the more people are around, the harder it's going to be to plan what to do. If you're the only one around, you have the arousal for it being an emergency, but at least you don't have the added arousal of there's lots of other people around. So if you are so aroused that you can't plan what to do, you're not going to end up helping. But if there's fewer people, so you can plan what to do, then you're going to go to the last step, number 5, you're going to actually do it. You're going to actually help. So that is the 5 steps of helping in an emergency. I know they seem like common sense. They seem pretty simple. You're probably like, I don't need a class for this. But years and so many studies went into finding all of these and then also showing that they actually are accurate. So this is some really good science, lots of empirical studies showing that this really is what happens in helping in an emergency. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this chapter, and remember that next week we're going to take the Unit 1 exam, and the Unit 1 exam next week covers chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8. So it covers 5 chapters, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8. So let me know if you have any questions as you go to take the exam. My email address is marydz@cameron.edu. All right, thank you. Goodbye.